Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever in the beautiful world you are. Welcome to Aquarius Rising Africa. And of course, I am delighted to have with me John Perkins, who's the best-selling author of Confessions of an Economic Hitman. John, welcome. And I am so happy to have you with me today. How are you?
I'm great, Chantel. It's good to be with you. Thank you. It's the miracle of modern technology that we can be halfway across the world from each other and chatting like this.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I was saying to you, I mean, I actually thought you were in South Africa a number of years ago, but it turns out, as you say, you weren't. But there was a show that our investigative journalist did on Carte Blanche. They did a show on you a number of years ago and on your book, Confessions of an Economic Hitman. And I was absolutely blown away by this interview that I thought they did with you, but obviously it was just a expose, probably. And it was amazing for me to see what I think that had to be the first glimpse I had into what goes on behind the scenes. We always know there's a lot of shenanigans going on, and whoever it is pulling the strings, it's never the guys in the forefront. They're generally just the puppets. That there's something quite big and sinister happening in the background. So that for me was really my first peek into seeing what really goes on. So, I mean, when you got onto the show, I was like, John Perkins, I can't actually believe I'm sitting talking to you. Who in a million years would have thunk that I'd be having you on my show how many years later? But it's such a pleasure to have you. So maybe you could just give us a little bit of an intro on yourself, how you got into being an economic hitman, and maybe you can tell us what that is in your words. What is an economic hitman?
Well, I guess the simplest way to describe it is officially my title, incidentally, was chief economist at
Right.
a major international consulting firm. And I had a pretty good sized staff, anywhere from 30 to 50 people at different times working for me. My job was really to identify countries that have resources that our corporations want, like oil or other resources, and then arrange a huge loan to that country or loans from the World Bank or its sister organizations, what's known as the Washington Consensus. But the money would never actually go to the country. The country would never see the money. It would be transferred from the banks to a U.S. corporation like a Halliburton or a Bechtel or a Stone and Webster or Brown and Root, usually big engineering companies, to build major infrastructure projects in the country. Things like electric power systems, highways, ports, industrial parks. And these were things that would benefit a few of the wealthy families in the country, the families and the cronies that owned, that owned big industry that benefited from this infrastructure. But the majority of people would end up suffering because money would be diverted from social services like education and healthcare and others to pay the interest on the loans. And of course, the corporations would make a lot of money. The ones that actually built the projects, they'd make a lot of money. The rich people would make a lot of money in the country, and everybody else would suffer. But it looked good on paper, and I believed the paper for many years. I thought I was doing a good thing because I learned in business school that if you want to help a poor country, you invest a lot of money in infrastructure and you see the economy grow. Because we measure the economy by GDP, and it does. That happens when you invest in these big infrastructure projects. What I didn't realize until much later, after I'd been in the job for a number of years, was that GDP really only measures how well the wealthy are doing and the big international corporations. It doesn't measure prosperity of the country. It measures how rich the rich are getting. So at some point the country wouldn't be able to pay its debt. It's paid the interest by drawing money off education and healthcare and other social services, but it can't pay the principal. So we go back in the guise of the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, and we say, hey, look, since you can't pay your debt, we'll help you restructure, but that means you got to sell your oil or whatever the resource is. Today it tends to be lithium and cobalt and copper, the resources that are necessary for high tech. We'll help you restructure your debt, but sell these resources real cheap to our corporations without many or any environmental or social regulations, or vote with us on the next United Nations vote, or let us build a military base on your soil, or privatize your public sector businesses, your water systems and your utilities, and sell them to our investors. Things like that. So really, Chantel, what we were doing was creating a global empire. And we can call it an American empire, but it's really a big corporate empire, an international corporate empire that's highly supported and driven by U.S. policies. But in fact, to a large degree, the U.S. doesn't benefit a lot from it because many of these corporations never pay taxes, for example.
Wow. Right.
And I must mention that in the case where a president of a country or the minister of finance or whoever we were dealing with didn't accept the case, that's when people we call the jackals go in. And these are people that either overthrow governments or assassinate their leaders. And of course, the United States has a long history of sending in the jackals. You've seen it throughout Africa. You've seen it in South Africa. But the classic cases that most everybody knows about are Allende in Chile and Mossadegh in Iran, and most recently, 2009, Zelaya of Honduras. It's my job was pretty easy. I could tell the president or one of his underlings, hey, look, I'm going to help make you guys and your families rich, or you can meet the similar end to some of these other people who they've all heard about who went down because they didn't buy into the deals. So most of them buy into the deals pretty quickly.
So basically what they're saying there, well, what the EHM, as you call the economic hitman, the EHM would do then is go say, okay, here's the deal. We're going to make it very cool for you guys. We're going to line your pockets with lots and lots of dollars. You as the authorities or certain, like if it's the royal family or whatever that might be, will be very well taken care of. But basically the country is not going to benefit at all. The people of the country will not benefit. And if you don't buy into it, then basically you're going to get taken out. Is that it in a nutshell?
Well, except we would never say the people aren't going to benefit. We would be part of selling a story that the people will benefit. So the president or whoever can take these reports that we do to the local press and show them, look, when we accept this loan and hire these companies to build the infrastructure, our economy is going to soar. And the implication is that most everybody believes is when GDP increases, everybody's better off. So there's a whole perception there of benefit to everyone. So it's a story we sell ourselves. I believed it for a long time because that's what business school teaches me and that's what the World Bank says. But we also provide reports that the government leaders can sell to their people. And it looks very good on paper. So it helps them get reelected because they get this huge loan and now they're going to improve the highway system or the electric utility system or whatever that makes people happy and proud that this is going to happen. And sometimes it does benefit some of the people somewhat. They may get a little electricity, but the real benefits are going to the owners of big industry and the commercial sectors.
Wow.
But yeah, we basically would go into we mentioned this off air earlier, but I like to say we'd go into an office of a president or a minister of finance and we say, hey, here in this hand, I've got a few $1 million. Not today, it would be a few $1 billion, for you to help you become richer. Or in this hand, if you don't agree, I've got a gun. And I never actually carried a gun, but I knew these people we called the jackals were right behind me. And these government officials would know that too. They were not naive.
Yeah, because I know there were a couple of one that reached their untimely end through air crashes and stuff like that. So it's always made to look like an accident, isn't it? It's not really it's seldom a blatant assassination, right? It would be made to look like an accident.
It's true to the world press. It's presented as an accident, but leaders know. So, I only had two presidents that did not play my game, and they were democratically elected president of Ecuador, Jaime Roldos, and Omar Torrijos, the head of state of Panama. And I knew them both personally and dealt with them, and they were extremely courageous, and they refused these deals completely and openly, and defied them. And Torrijos particularly was quite well known all over the world. South Africa had a lot of great things to say about him because he, this head of state of this little country, Panama, with a small population and small economy, stood up to the big giant of the north, the United States. And both of these two presidents, Roldos and Torrijos, less than 3 months apart from each other, had these very suspicious airplane crashes. And of course, nothing was ever proven because when a plane crashes, if there's a smoking gun, it goes down with the plane. It's
right, exactly.
You can't find it. And but so to the world, these were both presented as accidents, but they were the synchronicity between the two was amazing, and leaders around the world got the message. They knew that these were not accidents, or at least they assumed that these were not accidents.
Yeah, everyone was talking about absolutely the three-letter agencies. I mean, I look at that, and I remember not long after Nelson Mandela was released from prison, and I think most of us realize now he was certainly not the saint he was portrayed to be. What was his name? Oh, the Mozambican guy. Samora Machel was the president of Mozambique, and he also met his untimely death in a plane crash.
Mm-hmm.
And not long after, Nelson Mandela and his wife were married. And I mean, you just got to look at these things and you got to question what the heck is that really about, right? Because I think none of these things are coincidental, and they love certain ways of eliminating their targets. There's always a certain way. I mean, I think we've seen that a few times over.
Yeah, and presidents and their staffs and cabinet members are put in a very difficult position, frankly, because I've talked to presidents who will say, well, I had a choice of staying as head of state and trying to do the right thing on some levels, but also giving in to these demands by what I would call the corporatocracy, the empire.
Corporatocracy. I love that word you created, by the way. It's corporatocracy. Yeah. Guys, you all got to remember the word corporatocracy. I mean, that is like so self-explanatory, that's for sure.
Yeah, because that's really what this empire is. It's not really an American empire, although, as I said, the head of American politicians are part of the corporatocracy. And so there's a real strong relationship, but it's bigger than that. And today it goes to China big time. But so I don't know where I was going with all that, but these heads of state, they understand that it's to their benefit to do this, to stay in there, and then maybe do whatever they can. Maybe they can increase minimum wage a little bit. Even the ones that really want to help their people, they understand that if they get assassinated or overthrown in a coup, they're going to be replaced by someone who only caters to the corporatocracy. So,
right.
If you really happen to be one of the few leaders who is a really good guy, and wants to help the people, as Torrijos was and as Roldos were, you don't do what Torrijos and Roldos did, which is really stand up to the corporatocracy and defy the corporatocracy. You play the game, and you do what you can within that system to do what's better. It's a huge compromise. And I'm not saying that's the right action to take. I'm just saying that that's the facts of the world. And I've known presidents who did go that route and said, well, you know, I got to do whatever I can to stay in power and do the best I can. And incidentally, I find the same thing with corporate executives, big corporations, Fortune 100, Fortune 500 corporations. They'll say, you know, I want to do the right thing. I want to help my employees. I want to give them raises. I want to increase the minimum wage. I want to clean up the environment. I've got grandchildren. I want to create a better world, but I know that if I lose a little bit of market share or the stock price goes down, my main investors, the big time investors, will throw me out, and they'll replace me with someone who only cares about stock prices or market share. So my job is to stay in power and do as much as I can on a small level to make this company more socially or environmentally or both responsible. So there's this incredible game that these heads of state play. And you know, Chantel, we can all understand this because to a certain degree we all do this. You know, right. We all we all fly in airplanes and drive cars, and a lot of people eat meat, you know, and we all know that these things are bad for the environment, and yet
that's more just a microcosm of we kind of escalate the microcosm of that macrocosm. So we can't, you know, it's exactly that. We can't just say this happens at government and state level. You look in the business environment, right? In corporate companies, in family units, you know, it's all happening there. There's a authoritarian who basically shouts the odds. And if you're not in line with that, you're going to get your ass whipped. It's as simple as that. This is just really on a macro. Absolutely. I fully agree with you there. I fully agree with you on that.
Yeah.
It really just is it's like this great big machine that somehow we've all chosen to be on this earth at this time. I always say this is such an exciting, beautiful time to be alive. And I think it's such an amazing way that we can get out of this matrix, because we really are in the matrix. And I've watched a bit of your stuff as well, and I really like what you're saying, you know, about how we can do things, but I want to get to that a little bit later. But if you don't mind, I want to reverse a little bit. And I want, if you wouldn't mind explaining to the viewers and myself how you kind of got into this system. It's very interesting what I found when I was reading and listening to your book. There's certain, and I want to just make it clear to our viewers, I did ask John beforehand if he was involved in the secret societies and brotherhood of the Freemasons. That's a resounding no. So, and I know that with a lot of that stuff, there are certain things that have to be done and oaths to be taken and stuff like that. But no, that is not the situation here. But by the same token, the powers that be have a way of pinpointing who the people are that can carry out these missions or these jobs. How can you, if you can just reverse a little bit, if you don't mind, and then explain to us how they got to you, that they kind of like, because you were super successful. You were super successful in what you did. I mean, you know, there's no question around that. You were dealing with the head honchos of the world. So in order for you to have done that, there would have been a certain path for you to follow. Can you maybe just explain that to us, please?
Yeah, it's actually, I think it's probably a much more normal kind of path. Oops, sorry. That was my phone. Sorry. I thought I turned it off. I thought I turned it off, but I guess I didn't. Now it's off.
It's funny because as your phone came through, a message came through. I thought that was
Oh,
Messing
oh,
me up.
oh my gosh, excuse me. I think it's the National Security Agency calling. Well, I don't care what you say. I'm going to talk on the show anyway. Okay, so just screw off, bug off. There we go.
I love it. Thank you.
I wanted to do that for a long time, you know.
You had to do it on a show to Africa, didn't you?
Yeah. Well, I've done it in the book, I think, anyway. But you know, there was a very strong attempt on my life too. That's another whole story.
So cool.
But in answer to your question, it's all about the Vietnam War. So, you know, by the time I turned 18, I was draft fodder. The Vietnam War was raging, and the draft was coming after me. And I hated the war. I was not about to go off to Vietnam and kill or be killed by people I had nothing against. I agreed with Muhammad Ali, the boxer Cassius Clay, Muhammad Ali, who said, I ain't going off there to fight those people. I ain't got nothing against them. I ain't going to be killed by them, or I'm not going to kill them either. I felt that way. And so, I went to college, but actually the draft didn't come after me till my sophomore year in college. I was fed up with college. I wanted to go out in the world and experience the world. So I quit college and went to work for Hearst newspaper, this big newspaper chain in the United States. I love that job. I was in the city room. It was crazy. It was wild, like something I'd never experienced. I grew up in a little rural town in New Hampshire where my dad was a school teacher. I'd never experienced anything like this. But then the draft came after me. So I got back into school, and I ended up going to business school. And that's kept me out of the draft until I got that. When that finished, I'm still facing the draft. And I don't want to leave the country and all my family by going to Canada or South Africa or someplace. And I don't want to go to prison. So I joined the Peace Corps, and the Peace Corps was draft deferrable. But before I did that, I got married my senior year in college, and my wife's father was very high up in the U.S. Department of the Navy. One of his best friends was very, very high up in the National Security Agency, the NSA. And he understood my problem, and he said, well, you could maybe join the NSA, and that would be draft deferrable. So I said, well, that's a great idea. I can become a spy, James Bond. At that point in my life, I thought that would be exciting and fun and interesting. That's not going to Vietnam, but it's. So he arranges for me to have an interview, several days, very intensive with the NSA, and they included lie detector tests. And in that process, I think they discovered three things that were very crucial about me. It made me vulnerable to them. And these three were that I really wanted to have money, because I never had any. A teacher's son, in rural New Hampshire. And I wanted power, and I wanted women. And so my dad was teaching at a boys' boarding school in New Hampshire. I grew up living in a boarding school house and eating in the dining room every day from the time I was 4 years old. I was surrounded by boys all my life, and I went to that school. When I was in high school, so no girls. I didn't know. I was terrified of girls. I was incredibly attracted to them, but terrified of them because I didn't know anything about them. And so I'm in this, and I got married. I was in college, so there's been one woman in my life who was very much like my mother in many respects. So that was easy for me. But so I go through these tests, and they come to the conclusion that they've got leverage against me. They can offer me money, power, and sex. And that was the conclusion. But I didn't know that at the time. And after I got out of those interviews, I was offered a job with the National Security Agency as a trainee. And I was still in college. I had about 3 months left, and I walked by this conference room one day, and there was a Peace Corps volunteer giving a talk, and I just happened to walk in there. And my God, that appealed to me. He was talking about, going and living in countries and living with the people. And I had a fascination with the way that Indians in the United States had lived close to the land in the forest. I'd grown up, in rural New Hampshire, surrounded by forest. The Algonquins speaking people used to be there. My family went back over 300 years. We had some Indian blood, I think. We weren't ever quite sure, but it looked that way. And so I went up to this guy after his talk, and I said, hey, if I requested the Amazon, where I knew people still live that way, do you think I would get it? And he looked at me like I'm crazy, and he said, I'm sure you'd get it because nobody wants to go there, and we need Peace Corps volunteers there. So to make a long story short, I ended up being in the Peace Corps for 3 years, and in the Amazon for much of that time. But while I was there at the end of my term, at the end, after about 2 years before I started my third year, which was an extension, I was approached by this man in a business suit and looking very official. And it turned out he was the senior vice president at the company where I became ultimately chief economist. And he was also a liaison between that company. He was a colonel in the Army Reserve, U.S. Army Reserve. He was a liaison with the National Security Agency and the CIA. And he had my files. And he eventually offered me a job and recognized that I had certain skills. They had leverage against me, but I was a good writer. They needed an economist who could really write reports without a lot of information, because the countries I was going to go to didn't have a lot of data, and someone who could survive under rough conditions. And I had all those assets. So, and when I got out of the Peace Corps after 3 years, now I'm 26 years old, and the draft can't come after me any longer because that's the cutoff age. And so they offered me a job, and I take it.
Wow. So that's when they started training you, and you obviously started doing your, because I think you ended up as the chief economist. Was that right?
Yes. Well, the training was, so the next thing I know, I'm hired as an economist, and the only economist the firm had at that time, and they needed the World Bank had now mandated that engineering companies like that one had to have economists writing the economic reports, but previously had been done by engineers. The World Bank said, you can have economists. So it was me. And the three other guys that had the job, but none of them could do it well. They all had advanced degrees in economics, but they couldn't survive in the wilds of Ecuador or Indonesia or wherever and write these reports. Anyway, it's a long story. It's in the book. But the next thing I know, I'm approached by this very attractive woman. Again, they know my weakness, and she introduces herself as Claudine Martin or Martin, and she says she's going to be my trainer. And we ended up going to her little apartment on Beacon Street in Boston. The headquarters were in the Prudential Tower in Boston, which is right next to Beacon Street. And I would spend days in her apartment, and she would tell me what it was I was expected to do. And at the same time, she was, making sure that I got all the other, she told me you get power and money, and she was making sure I get the third thing, sex, and teaching me also how to relate to women, how to seduce women, and how to properly be seduced.
Wow.
It was a really fun training program, I got to say, but it also was very. But it also,
I think nowadays they call the honeypots, aren't they?
Oh, she knew all the tricks, but it was also very serious about, she told me about what I would be expected to do about arranging these large loans, and also, like I learned how to legally bribe heads of state. We didn't get into this before, but my company was determined not to break any of the U.S. laws against corruption, against bribery. There were some very strict laws, but there's so many ways around that. And I'll give you one example. This company was located in Boston. our board of directors and a lot of our executives had very close ties to MIT, Harvard, Boston University, Boston College, Northeastern. There's all the, Boston's full of colleges. And so I could go to countries that I wanted to have the president on our side and offer him and all of his cronies scholarships for their kids. I would say, we can get your kids into one of the great Boston colleges, and we'll completely pay for it. We'll give you a full scholarship, your kids a full scholarship. We'll pay for airfare. We'll pay for room and board. We'll hire your children when during Christmas vacation or summer vacation, or when they graduate. And that's worth a heck of a lot of money, especially to someone in a country like Bolivia or Guatemala or Colombia or Ecuador. It's worth a lot of money to anybody. But it's completely legal. In fact, we brag about it. So, we released these reports to the Boston Globe and other local newspapers about how last year the company, gave $2 million in scholarships to people in very poor countries. We never happened to mention that it was to people who didn't actually really need the scholarships. They were the wealthy families, but it was really a bribe, but totally legal. And there are a lot of other there are other things you can do around those same lines, big time.
Wow.
Yeah.
So obviously I mean, I would imagine they deliberately created these loopholes, because to me, I mean, obviously they would have seen where these loopholes were coming from and how they were being used, right? It was just not a direct bribe where you could be arrested or put in jail for it or something like that, right?
Well, yeah, and I don't know that anybody has to create the loopholes, because I think under almost any law, there's, smart lawyers or smart economists or smart whatever you happen to be, smart economic hitmen can find ways around the law if somebody wants to find their way around the law. Now I write a lot about how we need to transform the system that I call the death economy to a degenerative death economy to a regenerative life economy. And I'm very clear that I think, laws that try to stop you from doing things don't usually work too well. The things that work well are the ones that give you incentives to do the right thing, not to punish you for doing the wrong thing, but to give you incentives to do the right thing. And that's, then it makes it, then there's not the motive to bend the law. Whereas where we were told, don't pay off bribes, don't slip money under the table to anybody, and yet our competitors from other countries, and some from the United States who didn't care so much, they were paying people off. Overt corruption, overt bribery. We were smart enough to figure a way to do it that wasn't illegal. There's nothing illegal about giving scholarships to people from other countries.
Wow. One of the things that I was absolutely fascinated by was the involvement that the US had in Saudi Arabia in pretty much, let's call it westernizing. Westernizing, is that a right word?
Yeah.
Saudi Arabia.
Yes.
I was like, what? Maybe you could explain to us how that happened. I mean, what happened in Saudi Arabia. One thing I was completely fascinated by as well, you talk about when you first got there, there was herds of goats eating the rubbish in the streets, and your driver said no self-respecting Saudi would be seen picking up garbage. So they have the goats to do that. And that was kind of like one of your inroads there. I'd love to hear you maybe just tell that story about how the US got Saudi Arabia to do what they did and pretty much compromise, if you will, the royal family there so that they did get involved.
Yeah, well, and my company was the first of many American companies that ended up going in. So we were right at the beginning edge. So what happened was back in the early 70s, between the war between Israel and the Arab world had really heated up, in the United States had sided with Israel, and Saudi Arabia was really the lead in OPEC, the Organization for Petroleum Producing Countries, and Saudi Arabia was the lead one, and also had more oil than anybody else. And they instituted sanctions against the United States, an embargo. So oil wasn't coming into the United States, and we had at our gas stations, for example, long lines. People sometimes waited a day or more to get gas, and it just wasn't there, and it was destroying our economy. And the U.S. Treasury Department, somebody very high up in the U.S. Treasury Department and the U.S. State Department came to my company and said, we need to put an end to this. We need to make sure it'll never happen again. We need to get Saudi Arabia on our side. So you do it. And they called me in because the talents that I had. And, we ended up getting a very large contract with the U.S. Treasury Department. So they paid the bills, they paid us. We didn't officially work. I didn't officially work for the government. I was working for a private company, but the private company had this huge contract with the U.S. Treasury Department. And we went off to Saudi Arabia to basically seal this deal, and it was called. We referred to it as SAMI, the Saudi Arabia money laundering agreement. I think that's how it. Yeah, it's been a long time since I've talked about this, Chantel, but and basically the agreement became. It's a long story, but the short version of the result is that Saudi Arabia agreed to basically reinvest all its petrodollars, or the money it made off selling oil to the world, in U.S. Treasury bonds. And the interest from those bonds would be used to hire U.S. corporations to westernize Saudi Arabia. Basically, we didn't say it like that, but that's what it amounted to build big cities in Saudi Arabia, which Bechtel Corporation took the lead on in that regard, and to build oil refineries and big factories and many other things, the things that have westernized Saudi Arabia, these incredible cities and so on and so forth. And in addition, Saudi Arabia agreed to never increase the price of oil by any number that wasn't acceptable to the major oil companies, and not ever to shut down the supply of oil again. And it agreed to only sell oil in dollars. That's what the petrodollar came in. So the United States in 1971 went off the gold standard under Nixon. And now the US dollar is kind of floating out there wildly. But now suddenly we've tied it to the price of oil. So it becomes the oil standard. And we in the United States, the quid pro quo was that we agreed to defend Saudi Arabia under any circumstances. And all those things happened. And, I went over to Saudi Arabia very quickly. I took a number of my staff members over. They lived there for quite a long time, implementing these policies. And, we can see, like with the Khashoggi case, where, this Saudi Arabian guy who was assassinated by the Saudi government, and there seems to be absolutely no doubt that's what happened. We defended the family. And it appears that after 9/11, we helped the U.S. government helped rush family members out of the United States on airplanes when there were no flights allowed, and on and on and on. And we've stood by Saudi Arabia throughout. And the first Gulf War was really a response to Saddam Hussein threatening to attack Kuwait and Israel. And Saudi Arabia. And our job was to go in and make sure that didn't happen. So it was quite a deal.
So you're basically confirming then that, I know there have been lots of rumors around this, that after 9/11, that bin Laden's family and friends, put it that way, family and friends were flown out of the States and protected.
Well, yeah, personally, I can't confirm it, but that seems, all the evidence certainly indicates that. I can't remember whether the U.S. government has actually admitted to it or not yet, but I think there's no question about it. But I will also say that the deal recently has been falling apart. And, this is this attempt now for Israel to negotiate some sort of an alliance with Saudi Arabia, as it's done with Egypt and some other countries. because Saudi Arabia increasingly has turned to China. And
Right.
several things in that regard have happened. One is that China has become so powerful and has, economically, and it very attractive. And the United States is no longer the world's sole empire. Saudi Arabia is emerging as the new empire, or at least it's competing very strongly with the United States, which is the topic of my third edition, or third in the trilogy of the Economic Hitman books that just came out about a year ago. But also, there's been tremendous resentment of the United States amongst Muslim countries because of the wars that we've conducted against Muslim countries like Iraq and Afghanistan, and the attitudes in the United States. Now, we in the United States, we like to say the Chinese are being very difficult and mistreating and discriminating against Muslims in China, which is true. But at the same time, they haven't conducted war against any Muslim countries. Both the United States and China and Russia have. So China is looked at by the Muslim world a little bit more favorably these days, and Saudi Arabia is wavering in its deal with us now. And of course, it's been since the early 70s that we've had that deal. So it's been a long, long time, but it was a very, very successful deal. And it's one of those I should be proud of having put together because it's been so successful. But I have to say, I'm not particularly proud of the success. At the time I was, because I thought it was the right thing to do. It's so, so interesting that throughout all of this time, throughout so much of the time I was an economic hitman, I kept thinking I was doing the right thing. And I think that's so true of many people in the business, that they don't know the problems they're creating.
I fully agree with that. I fully agree with that. I think a lot of people become part of the system. And I mean, we can talk about who began the system and how it began, but really, they really are targeted, in my opinion. The majority of top players are targeted, and they're targeted from a young age, or maybe while they're at university and stuff like that. And then they are kind of guided and corrupted and manipulated into positions that, as you say, money is a very tempting thing. So, and of course, when you're working in this courtocracy, right?
Yeah.
It's very difficult to get out of that wheel.
Yeah.
So it absolutely is. But one thing, just while we're on the topic of Saudi Arabia, one of the things that also, when I was listening to your book and reading your book, it was about Idi Amin. Now, Idi Amin was president of Uganda in the 70s. And I mean, he was absolutely the most prolific dictator I do believe that Africa has ever seen. And Africa has had a few dictators. I mean, I think he even surpassed, what's the Zimbabwean one, Robert Mugabe. He literally exterminated his own people by the millions. He literally did. Mm-hmm. And what annoyed me so was that after he was pretty much overthrown, or whatever it was, and I remember this in the 70s because I was a kid then, and I remember this at the time, but I don't remember the details. But then obviously he was then hidden in Saudi Arabia. The Saudis hid him. There he was, living his best life, fishing, taking strolls on the beach at sunset and at sunrise, swimming in the ocean, doing whatever he was doing. And this was done with the knowledge of the US government, and they kind of, because of the deals that were struck, obviously, between the US and the Saudis, and all because of oil. So let's not rock the boat too much. There this man was, after creating so much pain and so much anguish, living his best life to right till the end, and having abandoned his country and his people with absolutely nothing. They were left with absolutely nothing. I mean, anyone who knows about Idi Amin knows that name just evoked so much fear in the African people. It's crazy, right?
Yeah.
Wow.
He was living like a king in Saudi Arabia, quite literally. It's a great example.
Why do you think that was? I'm interested to know why they housed him and why they protected him the way that he did. What was the connection between Idi Amin and the Saudis? Do you have any idea?
No, I think it probably had more to do with, the whole colonial history of Africa and the involvement of the colonial powers from Europe as well as the United States, and
Right.
the desire to continue to dominate resources in those parts of the world. And at that time, the colonial empires were beginning to collapse. We saw it in Zimbabwe. We saw it in Rhodesia, what became Zimbabwe, and throughout. And so I think it was all of those things were tied together, and we felt we owed something to Idi Amin.
Well, he probably sold out because we know Africa is probably one of the most minerally rich continents that there is, right? So,
Right.
I mean, it's a well-known fact that I know the US as well has sent in their troops, whatever you call them, into so many different African countries, creating wars, right? Creating wars, and then going in there, being the peacekeepers and usurping their oil, gold, diamonds, whatever it is they're looking for, and that's how they would get it. I mean, I mean, as Africans, we know that happens. So it's just interesting because Idi Amin as well, I mean, whatever the resources in Uganda were at the time, he would have sold out. I mean,
Yeah.
he was a big fat guy with nostrils this size. I mean, we always used to joke about him, about his nostrils being like sunglasses, right? I kid you not. Okay, I kid you not. But that was Idi Amin. But it was just so frustrating to know that that's actually, because I've often wondered about that. We knew he went somewhere. We knew he was hidden somewhere. Many people spoke about that being Saudi Arabia, but no one was really sure. Actually, I mean, I know we haven't really spoken about it here for a long time. But
Yeah.
I mean, and I wonder how many other sort of African leaders and things like that have been protected, of these dictators. It just makes it just makes us wonder how many, for me as an African, how many other people have been
Well,
protected.
it's interesting, as you said, that it's the wealthiest continent in the world resource-wise and the poorest one per capita-wise, and Latin America is not too far behind in both of those regards. And there's this colonialist mentality that's in both of those areas, and I think leaders in both of those continents, on both those continents, it goes back a long time where they realized that to survive and to get wealthy, local leaders realized they had to collaborate with the colonial powers. And whether it was the British and the French and the Germans and the Dutch and so on in Africa, or the Spanish and the Portuguese in Latin America, if you cooperated with them, if you collaborated with them, if you worked with them, you got rich and powerful. If you didn't, you were gone. And then when the colonial powers left, these same families, these same groups of people understood that, well, we can just keep behaving the same way. We don't really need the colonial powers. We can just run these places ourselves. We're now the colonial leaders, basically. So today, I think both Latin America and Africa are, to a certain degree, and I think we could dispute the use of the word, but I think in essence, those areas are being colonized by local families.
Make no mistake. I mean, I'm a descendant of the colonizers, so I'm not. And I certainly have. I mean, if I look at my family lineage, rest assured they were powerful as well. So I'm not coming in here, and I don't want to say the Americans all bad or whoever was doing it. We all have a price to pay. Right. And I think Ladi, you said the Belgians, absolutely, the Belgians in the Congo, they were the worst when it came to, what's his name, Leipzig or whatever his name was. I mean, he was horrific. were the Congolese. He was absolutely horrific. And to this day, I mean, we talk about blood diamonds, that's where they come from. And to this day, they are still going, the diamonds are still going to Belgium, and they are still being cut and set and done whatever in, what's the capital of Belgium again? I can't remember. Leopold.
I was just there, and I can't think of it either. I was just there a couple of months ago.
I feel like a bit of a dance here as well. But exactly, it's still happening. And I know for a fact what happens is, like, I mean, one of a guy I know that was part of the three-letter agency, but coming a Swedish guy living in Africa, was part of the corruption. I mean, like with the Bush Wars here. The Bush Wars basically ended at the 1989, 1990. And he said to me, Chantal, he said, why do you think the Bush Wars ended? I said, because the terrorists surrendered. Oh no, he's gone. Anyway, Brussels, yeah. But I'll carry on, and hopefully John will join us again. But I'll just carry on the story anyway. He said to me, Chantal, why do you think the Bush Wars ended? So I said, because the terrorists surrendered, and he laughed. He said, well, when was the German wall broken down? I said, okay, here's John back again.
I don't know what happened, but something happened. And I think I hit a button by mistake over here. I was just trying to adjust my screen, and I think I hit a button by mistake, but I apologize. Here we are.
No problem. So I was just talking. It's Antwerp, by the way, in the capital. Yeah.
What is it?
Anyway. What I was saying was the guy, a friend of mine, who was saying to me, who was a Green Beret, by the way, and he trained with the Selous Scouts. They were trained by the Selous Scouts of Rhodesia, who were the top reconnaissance, and as well as the Kufuta in Namibia, and the Rekis in South Africa. I mean, yeah, because I mean. Really, I mean, our guys, South Africa had a very formidable army in its heyday. Nowadays, it's a friggin' joke. I mean, these guys are riding around in tanks, crashing into each other. It's the local joke. But anyway, and he was saying to me, Chantal, why do you think? When did the Bush Wars end? I said, in 89, 90, somewhere around there. And he said, well, why do you think they ended? I said, because the terrorists surrendered. Starts laughing. He goes, okay, when was the wall in Germany broken down? I said, around about the same time. He says, nothing. He said, the same people that were backing the Bush Wars were then backing the wall being broken down as well. And they just didn't want to spend all the money. I went, oh my God. Mm. And it just made sense. I cannot tell you how destructive. Apartheid it was a disgusting system. I grew up in the heart of it. Okay, I was right there, growing up in apartheid. It was, and for me as a kid, it never ever sat well, ever. But we were also brainwashed into believing certain things, for sure. As white South Africans, we were brainwashed into believing certain things. So, but I remember when I was 16, 17, 18, when all our guys were going to the army and going onto the border, we called it. They were fighting on the border, right? I mean, day after day after day after day, these 17-year-old, 18-year-old, 19-year-old guys getting killed on the border. For what? For what? Because of this fake war that was carrying on. I can't even begin to think about that. It just makes me sick. But anyway, this particular friend of mine, now I know, okay, what happens is the three-letter agencies would then send them in. Now, in Africa and in South Africa, you get different royal families, the royal tribes, okay? Now, they own the rights to the minerals and the resources in certain areas. So what the three-letter agencies would do was send in their guys, their agents, and they would then corrupt the royal families. And in so doing, they would then give them X amount of stuff, and then they would usurp. And a lot of it was emeralds, diamonds, and gold. that was the main resource that they were siphoning out of South Africa. And I mean, and I know the rest of Africa as well. There's not even a question, but I can really talk about South Africa with more confidence about that, because that for sure is what I know. Right. So these guys would come in and they actually had jobs to corrupt the royal families. And this particular friend of mine, I know, he was friends with the Mandelas. He was Nelson Mandela's personal security guard. He was at Mandela's funeral. He was hanging out there with the family, you know. So they really worked themselves up in these positions, but their job is to corrupt the royal family so that they can, as I said, you know, the different royal families, and they're not all big. I mean, you know, you'll get this bigger and smaller tribes, but they generally all have a royal head, or a lot of them have a royal head.
Right.
And then they are corrupted, and that's how they get the money out. And of course, the royal families would then have the, get the money and get the wealth, but the rest of the tribe does not. And that's unfortunately how this country suffers and this continent suffers, because unfortunately there's a lot of African heads of state who are very, very easily corrupted because of money. You know, they see, and of course the African people generally love America, because in America they see everyone has money, everyone is famous there. You know, you go to America, you become famous. You go to America, you get rich. You know, that's the kind of narrative that is sold. Yeah. So it's actually quite sad, but that is really, that's kind of like what's happened in terms of the bush wars and stuff.
Yeah.
And of course, lots of the Green Berets and stuff would get trained by the Selous Scouts. Yeah, they'd come to South Africa and they were trained by the Selous Scouts. So they were also, you know, obviously do. I mean, and I know on another show, and hopefully I'm going to have you on again, if you agree. We can talk more about that then as well, in terms of, you know.
As I mentioned earlier, I had a good friend. He was actually a Reckies, and you know, he went through the training in Rhodesia first. He was trained in Rhodesia, which now is Zimbabwe. But then he ended up going to South Africa, and again, that's another whole story of how he took place in a number of CIA-sponsored coups, including the attempted coup at the Seychelles against Francois René, the socialist president of Seychelles. It was, anyway, another whole story. Yeah, this thing goes on and on and on. And now, you know, I think in another show, if we do another show together, it'd be interesting to talk about how China has gotten even better, if you want to call it that, or certainly more efficient. That's a better way to put it, I think, than we ever were. They've learned from the mistakes and the successes that people like I had, the mistakes I had and the successes I had, and other economic hitmen. I taught an MBA program in Shanghai, and I quickly realized what they want to do is pick my brain about how to be good at this job.
I saw that. I saw you lecturing in Shanghai to the MBA students on what a EHM is. That's very, very interesting, because it's true. The Chinese are super, super smart. Do you know what I read somewhere as well, that in this time that they've basically, because I mean, if we just look at what's happening with the youth, not just in America, but I think a lot of it in America, because America is such a powerhouse, and what they've been doing with Gen Z, you know, how they're like literally corrupting the young kids' brains and turning them into marshmallows in many ways. In the meantime, the Chinese young men over the past 20 or 30 years have been taking these injections, testosterone, and the average Chinese man is now 2 to 3 inches taller than what he used to be then. So while they're pretty much dumbing the West down, they're actually building themselves up, making not just physically stronger, but mentally stronger. I mean, you look at these Chinese kids at school and what they do. I mean, they are brilliant. Mm-hmm. They are. I mean, you just look at these formations and things they do. You just look at them, you know, from their schools and stuff. They are like, it's like one being that is just dancing together or doing these acrobatic things, whatever, you know. It's actually amazing. And as you say, now they've been watching, and China has infiltrated Africa. I don't think there's one country in Africa that is not isn't held at the throat by China. I mean, I can certainly say South Africa is Namibia. Namibia is just, I mean, ex-Southwest Africa.
Right. Yeah.
It's tragic.
Yeah,
it's
no
tragic
question about it. Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. Anyway, John, I think, we've kind of hit an hour. So I would love to have you on again, and we can definitely talk about the Chinese stuff. I want to talk more about those jackal-y things, the jackals. And then, of course, I know what you're also saying. There was like basically 3 tiers. So if the EHMs, economic hitman, wasn't able to win them over, they'd have the jackals. And then if that didn't work, then the military industrial complex. And then, of course, the military would then come in. So it's fascinating to see how this has worked. And, and again, I want to just say, I know, because a lot of my viewers are American, and I love you guys. It's never anything against America, that when we talk about stuff like this, but we do acknowledge America is a superpower and has been a superpower for a long time. And I think there was just a lot of bad energy that has infiltrated there because of the power. So all over the world, it's the same,
Chantal, I can say that I feel like I'm a very, very loyal American. My ancestors fought in the revolution and every war since, except the most recent ones. And I feel that to be a loyal American, we have to expose the mistakes we've made. The only way to have a democracy is to analyze your mistakes, to admit to them, analyze them, and correct them. And that's what I do. It's not it's because I love the United States that I write these things. And I want to expose the mistakes we've made and the death economy we've created, and now the opportunity to move into a life economy, which, as you said, we should discuss in another show. I'd look forward to doing that.
I love that, because I think it's so true. When we acknowledge our mistakes, we can change them. And when we take responsibility for the cock-ups we've made, we can change it. And that's all over. It's really all over. And I just want to say thank you so much for joining me. I know it's morning for you. It's evening for me. And it's been, as I said, never in a million years. Guys, when you see someone, this was early 2000s already. So let's say 20 odd years ago, I saw you on television. And I've never, ever forgotten you. It's amazing, like when you never forget someone. And who would have thunk that I would be sitting with you talking to you about this on my YouTube channel all these years later. So I feel like a little bit starstruck, I have to say.
It's been my pleasure, Chantal. It's been my pleasure. And keep up your great work. But the work you're doing is so very important. And please keep Aquarius rising in Africa and all over the world.
Most definitely. Definitely will do.
Okay.
So maybe I'll just talk to you a little bit off air after the show. But is there anything you'd maybe just like to end off with, and just to our viewers before?
Well, I think we live in a very blessed time, because we are understanding the mistakes we've made, and we're at a time of tremendous opportunity to correct those mistakes and move into what I like to call a life economy, an economic system that's regenerative instead of degenerative. And I'd like to get into that another time with you. But I think everybody, all your listeners, should feel privileged, as I do, to be alive at this time when these opportunities are here. And all the prophecies of so many cultures around the world, including the prophecy of Aquarius rising, take us to this time where there's a portal that we can enter into a new form of consciousness. And we have to make it happen, but we can all participate in that.
I fully agree with that. And the only way we're going to do that is by raising our consciousness, and by getting out of the matrix through raising our consciousness and through acknowledging the mistakes we've made. And through acknowledging how, I always say, we all just got to link arms, stand up, be in alignment, and then we can all do it together. That's really what we had to do at this time, in my opinion. So I want to say thank you very much to you, John. It's an absolute pleasure chatting with you. And I want to say thank you to all our viewers as well, who are always here and always joining in the chats and what have you. I appreciate you guys. And God bless you all. And we will see John soon. I'm going to chat him off air now to set up the next interview. Okay, guys, take good care. Lots of love. Have a beautiful weekend. Well, hello, everybody. Happy Wednesday. Welcome back to Aquarius Rising Africa. And I'm afraid we only have a single dose today. We have single trouble, but it's impactful trouble. So we're in for some shenanigans, I think. Hello, Jessie. Welcome back.
Hello,
How are you, honey? So good to see you again.
I know. Love being here with all of you.
Yeah, it's so good. And welcome back, everybody. It's really good to see you. Always awesome to see you in the chats. But before we go any further, Jess, do you want to just open for us in prayer?
Yes. Heavenly Father, we just come before you. Humbly, we ask that you would put a hedge of protection around our computers, our airways, our conversation today. We ask that you would bless it in your powerful name. And we ask that your Holy Spirit would bring forth the truths, Lord, the things that we see. Give us wisdom, understanding, and knowledge into the things that are being displayed openly around us, but help us to understand and know at that deeper level what is being communicated. We ask this in your powerful name, Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much. Wow, what a week. Gosh, we've really been having some entertainment, haven't we, in the last few weeks? It's really been quite interesting. I mean, if I didn't know what I knew, that there was a lot going on behind the scenes, I think that I'd be very confused right now. So, welcome to the Clarity Club, everybody. Thank you for doing live with us here. Because can you imagine if we had to do this on our own? So, but wow, okay, we're going to be talking about the Paris Olympics and all the symbolism that was displayed on the weekend. And of course, you know, you get the call it the normies who are saying, oh well, it's really just, you know, they playing out their history and there's nothing. And I had to say, I watched that, man, and I was like, come on, you, after all this time, 4 years of COVID, you still haven't cottoned on to the fact that there's something very sinister going on. But anyway, I mean,
it's an open display. You know, we have to remember that, you know, these individuals are connected to a foreign government and a foreign military, and they have, you know, a form of communication that is based off of all, you know, all oral, all reflection, all deeper knowledge of spiritual things, you know, not just physical things, spiritual things.
Right.
And, you know, who holds the contracts between the spiritual and the physical worlds? And the principalities, the powers, the authorities, the spiritual forces that we're dealing with. And I think, you know, openly, that's what we're seeing. So, you know, this conversation is going to be like none other. Nobody else is going to do a show like this. Just Shanti and I, and we're going to get
the weirdos, us two weirdos. We love
the system contracts today and what just happened. You know, it goes back to Jacob Rothschild. He was one of the big individuals holding some of those contracts in the system through the Golden Dawn. And when he passed away, you know, who is purchasing, who's buying those contracts, and what contracts are they buying? So we're going to find some of those out today.
I'm definitely looking forward to that. I can't wait to hear about that, in fact, because I think what I'm seeing now is that there's so much. It's like the desperation. I just feel like there's so much desperation from the other side. You can feel it in the airwaves. You can see it with one of these events happening after the other. It's like they're playing their final cards now, in my opinion. And I'm not saying they're going to lose. I think they're very powerful. The dark side is very, very powerful. So we've got to, you know, and remember, it's all about deception. So they're going to, You know, the minute you think one thing's cool, boom, another one arises, right? So it's amazing to see how, as you say, with all the symbolizing, the virtual signaling that we're seeing at all these massive, especially sporting events, right? I mean, we know there are so many of us who know what goes on there, yet we continue to support it. Why do we do this? Why do, I mean, and I can quite honestly say I don't, but I know so many people who know what goes on, but yet they still give it the time, the money, the energy, the tickets, whatever it might be, for these things to go on. And of course, what they were showing us there as well was the pale horse again, right? So we've been seeing the pale horse a lot lately. Beyonce is particularly well known for gallivanting around that pale horse with virtually nothing on, with her boobies and her bum, shaking about all over the place. But it's very interesting. So, you know, all this beauty and sensuality disguises this disgusting plan that is behind it all. And we must never forget that's what evil is. Evil is the epitome of deception.
Exactly.
So I'd love to hear from you. I mean, I think let's have a look at maybe the first one. I don't know, is there any way you want to start? But I just think, you know, there's this famous picture that's going around the internet, Jess, the Last Supper. Shall I pop it up?
Yeah, we can start. Actually, if you don't mind, you can show that one. And then I want to start with the Lady Gaga. So we're gonna kind of get into an overview here, because there kind of was, you know, some important things that came out. You know, we're gonna start here with Lady Gaga. At the end of the day, we have to remember that a lot of these celebrities, a lot of these face front people that we see stepping forward represent, you know, powers and authorities behind them, those who are behind the scenes, who are at the top positions within the system. And, you know, these are witches, they're warlocks, these are people who, you know, are trying to gain power and authority. They're going to be working with principalities and authorities, and they're buying and selling and trading for the contracts within the system between the spiritual and the physical world at a quadrant level. You know, you have contracts that are, you know, um, east, south, west, and north. At the United States level, you have the same thing. So, you know, it goes across both the quadrants as well as the regional contracts. Um, you know, and so when we see this, you know, I encourage people, go back and watch this video with Lady Gaga, because then you'll understand what I'm saying. You'll see the images and different things. With this, she uses these pink powder puffs, and at first you see her, just her legs and just the legs of everybody with these powder puffs. And in that, they start to make images with their little powder puff things. Those images represent something. The first image we kind of see is a right side up triangle. And then it goes into a second image, which is a triangle that goes down. Now, why that's important is because that imagery of a right side up triangle and an upside down triangle is one of the base images of the Kabbalah contracts. You'll find that in Kabbalah of the Golden Dawn. So that tells us that, you know, what she's displaying, it revolves around the Golden Dawn. Even the colors are important. You know, what do we know about the pink and how that's used? What do we know about the black? You know, what do we know about gold? We see this golden stairway, right? Which often the stairways are going to represent, you know, the seals for the stairways we went over in the Mormon contracts. I think that was probably our second or third show that we did in the Mormons, where we talked about that seal showing and displaying the staircase, right? And how that represented dimensions above, dimensions below. Okay, so she's on this golden staircase representing these dimensions, and then she starts displaying the contracts. That upper triangle being the what they call holy contracts, the triangle pointed down being the unholy contracts. All right, and they split them up. They don't show them both at the same time. So it tells you that they're doing different things with these contracts. So when we look at Gaga, like, what do we know? What have we brought out about her? She is a high priestess in the system. On the Reveal Report, George and I did a show where we brought out pictures and images of Lady Gaga going through training in the woods with a very specific another high priestess, and that was Marina Abramovich. So she has a connection with Marina Abramovich, and in that, the pink, what does that usually represent? That represents abductions. We know that that's connected to the moving, the transferring of children. So it's interesting that you have Gaga, making these symbols with these powder puffs in pink with these contracts. The black, what does that represent? I think that that's going to go to, the imagery of death. We see that in the Rosicrucian, like we've brought out the Rosicrucian layman with the rose. We've talked about, how that rose represents so many things. It, part of it, all the colors on that rose represent different contracts with certain unclean spirits. Also with, it represents certain military bases. And, I think that here they're outright displaying who has purchased those contracts. Up until now, Jacob Rothschild was an individual who held a lot of these contracts in trust. When he passed, I think we had mentioned on one of our previous shows where we talked about, what was happening with King Charles and the horses that went out, how it looked like the king's horses all of a sudden were riding out without the king. And yet, who was announced as dead? Not Charles, but Jacob Rothschild, right? So in that show, I had said, be watching, because, that means that his contracts are all open and people are going to start buying. They're going to start displaying who has those contracts. So
Wow.
I think that between, the hierarchy kids in the system and, those hierarchy kids are all going to be put into holy or unholy contracts. What I would say in this is, what I am seeing is that, and you can have, let me put it this way, you can have secondary purchasers who, everybody's connected to circle groups. So they're going to have certain people that are going to represent their circle groups. That circle group can include countries, nations. It can include, both quadrant as well as people regionally. So I think that that's what we're really seeing here. Who's purchased those contracts. It's going to be connected to the main country Marina Abramovich is out of. And regionally, it's going to be connected to Lady Gaga. That is how I would see that. And again, it's going to be the hierarchy kids, holy and unholy contracts. So let's go now to Oh, I want to say one more thing too. In that, I think there also is a distinct contract connection with France because she is singing in French. Um, words are very important to them. Language is very important. So I think that we're going to see France highly connected in this exchange of contracts at a quadrant and regional level with the hierarchy children contracts. Um, let's go next. Give it one sec. All right,
Okay,
Tim.
we're back.
Let's go next to the Jesus feast picture.
This one.
Yes. Oh, this is so fantastic. And I say that sarcastically. This is not the first time of recent that we're seeing this imagery, this mockery of the Last Supper of Christ. But I want people to notice that some of the elements of the imagery are very similar to something that we've already seen before, but we get a little bit more details. We also saw this imagery, if you could quick put up the picture just for a second, in the January of 2023 Vanity Fair magazine that I decoded with Madonna. One of those pictures showed the Last Supper, and it shows Madonna at that position of Mary instead of Christ at the table. Again, I shared how this specific imagery was specific to Grand High Priest rituals and the seven sufferings of Christ. So go back now to the Olympic one. So some of the similar things, like notice how you see this woman at the head of the table rather than Christ at the head of the table. That imagery is very important in the system. One, because, we know in Scripture that Scripture tells us that there is no name above the name of Jesus Christ. And even in the Golden Dawn, they have imagery that we've talked about in reference to, you've got the triangle or the sunshine facing upward. And in that, in the Golden Dawn contracts, you'll see the name Yahweh. But in the center of that, between the Yah and the Way, they'll put the Hebrew letter, the Sin Shin, thus making the name of God. When you have Yahweh with the Sin Shin there, you get Yeshua, the name of the Messiah. And that's the name that's supposed to be above every other name. But what we see with certain contracts within the system, particularly in the Catholic churches, is that they will use this imagery of the Madonna with the child. And in that, whose head are they literally raising above Jesus's? They're raising Mary's head. But that imagery doesn't really go to the real Mary, mother of Jesus, who really was an amazing woman. She was favored by God. She was obedient. She was faithful. But in the system, they use that imagery to represent Mar, M-A-R, which is another name for the female Leviathan. That same imagery is also used for Ashtaroth, who goes by many names, Jezebel, Lilith, the Queen of Heaven, right? And we even see within the Catholic Church that they give that title to Mother Mary. They call her the Queen of Heaven. So in this, when we see this feast picture and we see this woman with the headdress with the 5 stars on it, maybe 7 there, you get, that imagery of the sun representing the golden dawn. you get that imagery of Mar or Ashtaroth, the queen of heaven, being raised up. And, whose head in this imagery are they kind of putting below hers? Well, now they're, below Ashtaroth, they're putting another god. They're saying that that god is supposed to represent, the Hindu god. Oh, I was looking, I forgot what they said his name was, but anyway, it's one of the Hindu gods. But Dionysus is who they say it is. Dionysus, the Greek god seen in, a lot of um, Roman symbology, Roman contracts, representing, um, that part of the system, Rome, which was all under the financial authority of the Vatican and the Holy See. Okay. Now, think about this. The old system, the Babylon system, was all under this imagery of Rome, the Greek gods that went with it. But now we see, you know, that kind of there on the table. We even see the same coloring. What color was Rome or the Babylon system known as? It was seen in as blue. Okay, so none of this is just by mistake. We see this feast imagery, which I want to point out, a lot of those Catholic churches will have the imagery, right on the building structure in the stained glass windows, or they'll have these big wood carvings, these elaborate paintings of the Last Supper, right? When you see that, and I won't say every single church you see it in, but in certain Catholic churches, when you see that imagery, it represents the feast contracts. Those feast contracts are going to be those churches that are holding the yearly feast for the system, where they are going to engage in cannibalism. Those feast contracts are also connected to wine contracts, which we're told this represents Dionysus, the god of wine, right? We also know that some of these churches hold milk contracts, which is why, they'll show Mary with Jesus at the breast. That's a milk contract in the system. In my days, the main holder of those milk contracts was, the High Priestess Gloria Vanderbilt off of their property Biltmore. They would hold the yearly milk contract ritual, which includes, the killing of infants. So, the wine contracts even, they have a huge vineyard there at Biltmore. So who's buying all those contracts, right? Now, in this, we also have a mockery. We see in the Vanity Fair episode, we see Madonna actually on the table representing Mary, and we see all these women with her. Some of them may not have been, or we'll just say some of them may have been transitioned women, but we start to see that blend of, it's no longer the disciples, it's no longer all men. You see it switched, right? And here again, we see it switched where, you have all these, it shows women represented, but all transitioned, or the majority transitioned women, right? So that's important to take note of, because, there's blasphemies included in these contracts. There's a switch from, what we see the true image to be. Now they're mirroring it, and, they've mirrored it twice now. First on the Vanity Fair cover, now here. And even in that Vanity Fair cover, what were the targeted cities, where Madonna took her tour? It was to Italy, to France, and Spain. I think that, the deeper meaning of that was that, these contracts were being put out to those specific areas and the brotherhood within that. And we now see who has purchased and who holds that contract. Again, you have secondary representations. I think that Madonna, is one of those people. So it's going to go to regionally. What are the areas she's out of? Those are the circle groups that regionally have these contracts. And then at a quadrant, who was raised up, as a grand high priest that Madonna was sponsoring. We saw that, in the Grammy presentations, who was the grand high priest, all in red, representing the unholy contracts, even including the song Unholy. That was Sam Smith. So I think that, that whatever quadrant he's sitting in, all of this is interconnected with those individuals who now have purchased, these unholy contracts, which include, the milk contracts, the wine contracts, and the feast contracts with the cannibalism. So they're going to be the ones hosting, you're going to see people connected around those individuals hosting the parties. Again, we have, within that tour for Madonna, you have Italy, you have France, and you have Spain, all represented. Even a fourth hidden country, you had Turkey. So I think that those are the four main countries we're going to see their quadrant leaders taking over these contracts, with France being a forerunner in that. So it'll get interesting because
I'm interested
as
to
the
know. Sorry,
as the
Jess.
system transitions, let me say one more thing, and then
Okay.
so as the system transitions from the old Babylon contracts to the new contracts under the Leviathan system, you're going to see certain countries rise up, and those countries, they're going to receive their powers, their authorities for a time, and they're going to hand those powers and authorities over to the beast. So we'll start to see certain countries working with certain other individuals, primarily the Sanhedrin out of Israel. So it'll be interesting to see now after this what happens between France and Israel.
Wow. I'm interested to know, when we're talking about the cannibalism, and we know they do a lot of specifically child sacrifices, but I know it's not only child sacrifices they do. But when we're talking about these feasting contracts that they have, etc., that involve obviously cannibalism, is it only children they eat? And is it only the sacrificed children? Like, I would imagine at these events, there would be sacrifices held maybe the day before, or I don't know, whatever. And there would be whoever's been sacrificed in the ritual. Is that person then eaten as well? And is that who they eat at these festivals? I mean, this is very macabre, I know. But I'm sorry, I need to ask that question.
I want people to remember that the majority of their cannibalism is not revolving around the dead. It's not that they sacrifice and then consume. Even in my affidavits, I brought out a lot of how, they paralyze, and there's no pain drugs given. But these individuals will be paralyzed and they will be consumed alive, and they will know that they're dying and being eaten alive. So, it is a variety. You do have, you know, infant all the way through adult. Some of them, you know, beyond the being eaten alive, or some of them will just be prepared alive. They will, you know, have a variety. So, you know, I did witness things where they, you know, roasted individuals and then ate them, you know, almost like turkeys or other things. It just depends how they want them. In this, I would say that, you know, there's even something that is, they're pointing to something futuristic as well, because we see all the floral involved in that presentation of the god. Um, and you know, where do we usually see the floral headdresses and all of that imagery? We see that around the May 1st rituals. Um, so I would, you know, say that this also is pointing to the first feast that's they're going to host is going to be around those May 4th times, which I'd have to see what, let me quick see if I can look and see what Catholic feasts are around May 4th or May 1st, sorry. But keep going.
Wow. I'm just looking at some of the questions here. I want to just pop up. Sorry, just give me a moment, Jess.
Yeah, so let's
Does the
see.
light
So,
side, interesting question. Does the light side of the system, who now has to give obviously that impression that they are holier than thou, do they actually participate in cannibalism as well?
yeah, it just depends on the people, their positions, you know, and what they're going to be participating in. Not everybody's going to be cannibals. Um, you'll always have layers where, you know, you'll have those who are kind of being welcomed in, not knowing the full story, and then you'll have those who are higher up who know full well, you know, what they're doing. It looks like so Pope Pius the 12th established an additional feast of Saint Joseph the Worker to be celebrated on May 1st in order to coincide with the celebration of International Workers' Day or May Day in many countries. So let's look up Saint Joseph the Worker Feast before we get into our next part. Yeah, so that was declared in 1955. And Saint Joseph was seen as the patron of the workers. So, you know, that's also going to be the time we know on the people can go to openscroll.com satanic holidays to see the different satanic holidays, and all the way from it's actually excuse me, April 18th, which is the beginning of Ball Worship Week, all the way through May 1st, which is Beltane or Walpurgis Day. You're going to see massive sacrificial rituals. You've got the Druid Fire festivals, and they'll be sacrificing any age. But the grand high climax of Ball Worship Week, all the way through May Day, is April. You got April 24th through May 1st are going to be their highest sacrifices days in there.
Right. Wow.
Yep. So, all right. So let's go to the imagery next of whichever one you want to go to next. The head, maybe.
Okay, let's go to the head. Sorry. I think that pale horse image is quite a well-known one already now.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is another thing that was...
So you know, again, they're taking imagery that comes out of stories, out of history of France, right? And they want you to see it all connected with the things in France. But there's so much more. Like even in this imagery, right? What did we see with some of the magazine covers, the stars? We've seen the like the same type of body hoop skirts, right? But we've seen like I don't know what else to call them. We've seen the puffy bubble pants. Sam Smith has worn those, had this black pair on. All right, so we've seen the puffy um, bubble imagery of recent, that style coming back. It's all representative of different areas, different things that are happening. Um, you know, what is seen in this is that, you know, within the system, you have um, different underground areas. We know that under France, there's a lot of catacombs, and connected to those underground areas, you have, you know, regional leaders. In the underground cities, they're different than above ground. You know, above ground, we mostly will see kings, we'll see presidents, we'll see, you know, heads over countries. But what do we see underground? Underground, the majority of those cities, you'll see the headship represented by a female, a queen, known as a queen, and you have, you know, different colors representing those queens based on which quadrant they're over. So here they're displaying the red queen. There's actually 4 red queens, 4 white, and then you have 4 black and 4 gold or green, all representing the different underground cities. The blues will represent the queens that are over the water cities. So in that imagery, you know, we're seeing a red queen and we're seeing the loss of a head. So I think that, you know, it's representing that one of those queens has been replaced, and you know who has replaced her, that's the question. You know, who's replaced that queen? And we even see some of that in the Disney cartoon. Think about Alice in Wonderland, right? Which Wonderland representing that other dimension, that other world. We see the Red Queen, the Queen of Hearts, is known for, you know, often saying, off with their heads, right? So I think that a lot of this imagery is going back to that. And, you know, what was connected to the Red Queen later in other books, Alice and the Jabberwocky, we see what happens after the death of the Queen. We see Alice starts to encounter the Jabberwocky or the Beast coming forward. So I think that, you know, that's very telling about some things, plans, things that they're, you know, who holds the contracts with underground creatures. You have these underground leaders, some of them connected to above ground leaders that, you know, will contract with each other over, you know, who's caring for the beasts that they have. So that one we'll leave there. Let's go to the next one. We start to get into the pale horse imagery.
It's just
the 4 horses.
Just talking about that, to me, it was very clear that someone's head's going to roll if it hasn't rolled already. And I know, but my first thought, and I'm probably not right, but it gave me the idea of Kate, you know.
All right, hold up. It's going to be what?
I said it gave me the idea of Kate because, and I wasn't sure if it was like, for me, it was obvious when I looked at this picture, someone's head's going to roll. You know, that to me was clear, but I'm wondering if it's still future or if they were perhaps referring to Kate. I don't know, but I guess not, because there's not really a connection, is there? I mean, she's a British royal. This is French Parliament, but who knows? I mean,
Right.
it's interesting. Okay, the
Yeah.
pale horse.
All right. And, with the pale horse, that gets into some of the imagery going back to scripture. And I want to take just a few minutes to actually read these scripture passages because it's important to understanding the contracts and the authorities. So the first one, like where do we first start to see, the horse imagery in scripture? It's primarily out of Zechariah 1 verses 8 through 17, Zechariah 6 1 through 8, and Revelation 6 1 through 8. So the first time that the horses and the horsemen are mentioned is in Zechariah 1, and starting at verse 8. Zechariah was a prophet and he's having a vision, and in his vision he sees a man who is among the myrtle trees. And all of this imagery is very important to understand. And so he says, during the night I had a vision, and there before me was a man mounted on a red horse. He was standing among the myrtle trees in a ravine, and behind him were red, brown, and white horses. I asked, "What are these, my Lord?" And the angel who was talking with me answered, "I will show you what they are." Then the man standing among the myrtle trees explained, "These are the ones the Lord has sent to go throughout the earth." Okay, so that's a part of the purpose of these horses and this imagery is that the Lord is sending them out to go out throughout the earth. And they reported to the angel of the Lord who was standing among the myrtle trees, "We have gone out throughout the earth, and we have found the whole world at rest and in peace." Then the angel of the Lord said, "Lord Almighty, how long will you withhold mercy from Jerusalem and from the towns of Judah, which you have been angry with for 70 years? So the Lord spoke kind and comforting words to the angel who talked with me. Then the angel who was speaking to me said, "Proclaim this word. This is what the Lord Almighty says. I am very jealous for Jerusalem and Zion, and I am very angry with the nations that feel secure. I was only a little angry, but they went too far with their punishment." And that's, how these nations that felt they were at peace, right, and at rest, how were they treating Israel? And it says, "Therefore, this is what the Lord says: I will return to Jerusalem with mercy, and there my house will be rebuilt, and the measuring line will be stretched out over Jerusalem, declares the Lord. Proclaim further, this is what the Lord Almighty says: My towns will again overflow with prosperity, and the Lord will again comfort Zion and choose Jerusalem." Now, notice in that what these nations are saying is peace and prosperity really isn't. They're displaying feasts, they're displaying wine and wealth and riches, right? But what do we know it really to be? What are they feasting on? They're feasting on humans. They're cannibalizing, they're guising their sin, um, as something that's good. And the Lord has kind of had enough of that. So later, what we see now is, we see again this imagery of the the horses and specific colors associated with them. So in Zechariah 6, we see the four chariots. So on that, you've got multiple colored horses. He says, "I looked up again, and there before me were four chariots coming out from between two mountains, mountains of bronze. The first chariot had red horses, the second black, the third white, and the fourth dappled or pale, all of them powerful. I asked I asked the angel who was speaking to me, 'What are these, my Lord?' The angel answered me, These are the four spirits of heaven going out from standing in the presence of the Lord of the whole world. The one with the black horses is going towards the north. The one with the white horses is going towards the west. The one with the dappled horses is going towards the south. Okay, so as we see this imagery, so think about this, even as we see Beyonce on these covers with all these different horses, we understand then what is she's sending something out when she uses that imagery of the colored horses. She's sending orders out to different parts of the world, different directions, both quadrantly and regionally. It continues, when the powerful horses went out, they were straining to go throughout the earth. Then he called to me, look at these going towards the north country. They have been given my spirit, rest in the land of the north. So the north, which was, let's see which ones, that was the black horse, is the one that goes out towards the north. And that north country, it's been declared by the Lord, shall have rest and peace. Is there a false peace that can go out towards the north? That's interesting, So orders being sent out towards the north. Next, we see in connection to end time. So we're talking different periods, different things that we're going to see in these last days. We again see these four horses in connection with the 7 seals that the Lamb, Jesus Christ, opens in the heavenlies. And it says, I looked, and there before me was a white horse. Its rider held a bow, and he was given a crown, and he rode out to conquer and bent on conquest. The Lamb opened the 2nd seal, and there came another horse. This one was fiery red. Its rider was given authority to take peace, to remove peace from the earth, and to make people kill each other. And to him was given a large sword. Okay, so I just want to state this. When Beyonce put out this imagery of herself on horses, we saw all 4 colored horses. That was a first time we're seeing that imagery go out. Now we see with the seals, there's a second time that things go out. So it's interesting that this time we're seeing the pale horse a second time. So listen carefully. When the Lamb opened the 3rd seal, I heard a 3rd living creature say, come, and I looked, there before me was a black horse. Its rider was holding a pair of scales in his hand. And I heard what sounded like a voice among the 4 living creatures saying, 2 pounds of wheat for a day's wages, 6 pounds of barley for a day's wages. Do not damage the oil and the wine. Okay, and again, we see in the Olympics, we see that wine contract secured on the table, still going forth in the feast, right? Then the Lamb opened the 4th seal, and I heard the voice of the 4 living creatures say, come, and I looked, and there before me was a pale horse. Its rider was named Death, and Hades was following close behind him. Now we see Death and Hades again. Who has the key to the abyss that is considered to be in Hades in those lower realm contracts? That's Abaddon, Apollon. And it says, there were given power over 1/4 of the earth to kill by sword, famine, and plague, and by the wild beasts of the earth. So, we see, that's the imagery that we see connected in scripture to those 4 horsemen, particularly that 4th being a contract with death. Now, I want to just get into, does it just mean that they're given an authority to kill? it's not really these people. All of these contracts are held in relationship to a spiritual deity. We see a very specific spiritual deity who is known as death, who is given authority and power of death. He is the last one that his power is removed from him. What does scripture say? "O death, where is your sting?" Right? When is that power and that authority that death holds over men removed? That's when Christ returns again. So, what is death's real name? We learn that in the book of Exodus. The Lord tells death to go forward during the 10th plague in Egypt, there in Israel, that when Pharaoh refuses 10 times to obey the Lord and let his people go so that they may worship him, the Lord tells him something worse is coming. And he continues to harden his heart until he, what is he made that his contract with? It's death. But instead of, Pharaoh being able to use that against the people through oppression, the Lord sends death out to take the firstborn of Egypt. And that angel's name is Azrael. When we see the Rosicrucian layman, the rose, and we see the black coloring around each of those petals, that black represents the contracts with death. So each in the system, as hierarchy children are going through their contracts, and even, it includes those in the sovereign military, you'll see that they literally will take a black Bible. Some churches, I'll say, will take a white Bible. Most of the ceremonies, let me go back a little, most of these ceremonies with the sealings, with the principalities and the authorities that the hierarchy children go through are going to be done in the churches or the Masonic lodges. But they literally will take a book and for that seal with death, they will place that book at the back of the head or the thorax on the neck, which in Initiates of the Flame, we see that bone, which is like it looks kind of like an upside down shield or upside down triangle. That is their imagery for the spade, which they say represents the grave digger's spade, representing death, also representing that thorax spot right here at the back of the neck where the shoulder blades hit. That's where that contract, that seal with death is placed, is right there at the back of the head. And, they will bind those people to death, even though they don't know that that's a contract with death. You also see that in the Mormon Church, the Order of Melchizedek, as they're going through their certain rituals, they will have something placed right there over that back area representing that seal with death. So we see the contracts with the sealings, all of that being put under, who do we see as the riders on these horses? We know Beyonce is one of those who's come out with it. So we also then see, what imagery do you get out of that? What country do you think they're displaying in that scene with the horse riding out? Oh, we can't hear you, Shanti. You got to unmute.
Sorry, I was having a bit of a coughing episode just now. Are you talking about the Olympics? What country is it coming from?
Yeah, well, no, I'm glad you said it just like that. Kind of, I was saying, like, what imagery do we kind of see, right? And
Right.
we very much see the rider wearing a government or a mantle that has that imagery of the Olympics. So
Right.
who's buying that contract?
Mhm.
Is it, who owns, who runs the Olympics? You have the International Olympic Committee, um, based out of Lausanne, Switzerland. So,
Wow.
is it Switzerland that has received this contract now over, the pale horse death riding over the waters, right? So, kind of interesting that um, all this imagery that we don't understand, you know?
It's insane, yeah. And of course, it makes sense because the pale horse, as you said, the horse of death, couldn't, I mean, obviously to do with war as well, that metal, military, government, um, armor, suits, guns, stuff like that. So it would all be, as you say, about that death relating to war. So, of course, that for me, and of course, war creates famine, war creates
Right?
trauma, war creates oppression, war creates no money, right? So you
Right?
really are taking people down to the pit of despair. So to me, it's talking about war. This to me is like war's coming, heads are gonna roll, you know.
And
Um,
metal's an element,
right,
so
right.
you've got this quantum imagery, um, being displayed in this.
Wow. Golly gosh, so cray, isn't it? My word. Something else that was happening there, Jess, maybe. Is there anything else you want to say about that?
No, I think we've covered that well.
I'm just interested to know as well, because now that we have the Paris Olympics and we're seeing with all, as you say, when we're looking at that picture again, that whole transgenderism tone that's taking place. Now, the whole of the Olympics was based on transgenderism, because now when we're looking at these pictures, three of France's top drag queens were carrying the Olympic flame. Unfortunately, I don't know what this one's name is, but she was one. Then, of course, yeah, we have the Nikki, who's a very well-known transgender woman carrying the flame. And of course, this is the next one. What's all their fetish with the red hair? You see, we're looking at the red hair again, right?
Right?
And if we're looking at these, I mean, she's got the red outfit with the red hair. This one has got the red hair with a
But
white
think about, we
outfit.
talked about the representation of the queens, right? Drag
Right.
queens. You have
Yes, yes.
white and red.
Right.
Who are they
So
representing, underground? They're representing the different queens underground.
then, of course, I can't believe I'm popping that in there, but I am. Because and I wish I'd actually known 2 hours before the show that I was going to talk about this. Otherwise, I would have gone to refresh my memory. But you all know Candace Owens, right? She did a part on this maybe 4 or 5 months ago. I know she was recently fired from the Daily Wire. It was still when she was on the Daily Wire. And Macron's wife is not a woman, it's a man. And there were apparently journalists in France that spent years investigating this. And I mean, some of them disappeared apparently, and like the whole thing. But this is now actually, it's been made official in France. That Macron's wife was a man much older. I think she's about 20 or 25 years older than him, if I'm not mistaken, in any event. But this guy was a man, and he fell in love with Macron. Macron was one of his students, or he was a professor at a university or something. That's how they met. And then he transgendered to female, and then Macron and him suddenly got married. But the whole story is, and please go and check it out. Candace Owens did the story a few months back. And I know I'm missing some of the finer details, but I just wanted to bring this in now, because when you're looking at this full-on transgenderism theme we have going here, and then we have the president of France, who's clearly married to a transgender woman. And that I'm not saying because that looks like a man. It does look like a man, I'm not going to lie. But I'm not going to say anything other than what I've also known, heard Candace Owens speak about. And that's now been made official in France. And this is after years worth of journalism, journalists investigating this guy here. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting to me that France, the whole theme is about transgenderism, and of course the Baphomet, because to me that's really just moving into that whole Baphomet vibe, right? So what is your take on all this?
Yeah, I think we really see it, we really see it coming out, and we see, kind of that evil is not hiding anymore. It's not going to be below the scenes. It's not going to be subtle. We've gotten to the point where now publicly they are openly displaying what they believe and how they live and the perverseness of it. And I think, prepare yourselves, because this is just really, they're just kind of still subtly putting the imagery out there. But when do we get to the part where, they're showing the real perverse stuff that they do, the next level? I think, we're going to start seeing more of that come out, that they're going to flaunt where their rituals are. They're going to flaunt, their religious beliefs. And, that could include their adrenochrome harvesting, their organ harvesting, their cannibalism. But, we're going to see that come out more in the open.
Absolutely. I think that's, I think really we've been saying this for a while. And if I think about 4 years ago to when we began to now, and we see how this stuff has systematically been shoved into our faces and down our throats, and, they do it in such a way that they don't, it's not, I don't know, how do I even explain? It's, the public can't actually refuse it. They don't do it in such a massive way that you want to throw up about it. It's done systematically, bite-sized chunks, right? And you just like, people are just becoming more and more used to this absurd world. And, it's like, I'm wondering what it must be like for a youngster in this day and age, because men are not men anymore and women are not women. And if you dare say, well, I'm a traditional woman and I like traditional men, thank you very much. I like a man to be a man. And, so that now makes the majority of people on the planet, and soon it's going in that direction, homophobic or transphobic. So they're now, and they're doing the same thing like they did with COVID.
Yeah.
With the injection, oh, well, you're a bad person, you don't give a shit about your neighbor, right? Or whatever, It's that same thing that they're systematically pushing this thing down our throats, and people are just swallowing it because for the sake of silence or the sake of peace. It's the same thing here. They're throwing, why are so many people who have children and who have been children, all of us have been children, quiet and not saying a word about the sexualization of our children in schools? It's out there in everyone's faces. Why is every parent not standing up and rioting at this going on in their schools, right? So it's becoming more and more normalized, just like the jab. I mean, from one day to the next, first one day we were reasonably, or so we thought, free planet, and the next thing, boom, and you see people just split and divide and turn on each other. It's the same thing with this. They're doing the same thing. I'm seeing it's the same template, but used with different experiences now. So it really, it's unbelievable to me that so many people shut up when they should. I've always been the person, if I've been out in a club boogieing my ass off and someone's in trouble, I'm the one that goes. I'm the one that helps. I'm the one that's like, what do you mean you can't get involved? You've got to be kidding me. Someone's in trouble. How do you mean you're not getting involved? I can't understand that. I don't understand that, where people are just prepared to turn a blind eye and do nothing about stuff. And this is where it's gotten us. And I can see it happening. The gaslighting around this transgenderism is very, very, very strong. I mean, I saw those pictures that we went, the Last Supper and the Pale Horse. Let me just see if I've got it on here. It was doing the rounds on Facebook yesterday, and one of my school friends actually posted it, and I just want to see if I have it here. But I don't think I actually pictured the writing. But basically saying, this is what it is, and very sarcastically, the person who produced the show, whatever, people, this is what it is. This is France's history. So really just chill out, will you? You're being ridiculous. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, anyone that knows what's going on behind, it's obvious to me. How can people think Sam Smith dancing around like a Michelin man is normal with horns on his head? I don't know, Jessie.
I mean, and they use that imagery, like there's, how many times, like even in that Mormon book we're going through, how many times do they say they use the symbolism? It has meaning. It represents things in the spirit, right? And so what are they symbolizing? What does it represent? And I brought out that it's more than just a symbol, that these symbols are contracts between the spiritual and the physical world. Even in the military, they have a name for certain positions. Aquino supposedly considered himself one of those who held that position, and it was that of a historian. Their job's to tell the history, but why did they tell the history? Why do they give that information? It's just to cause you to reflect and to give you truths, about what they really do. If you don't come to that truth, they're never going to tell you, and we've brought that out. Like, how do they, have people enter into the trafficking or the rituals, the different things that they're doing? You have to figure it out. You have to, figure it out. When you figure it out and call it as it is, that's when, they're going to show you things.
But they're going to keep you stupid for as long as they possibly can, and they ain't owning up to anything because me? Of course we told you. We showed you what we were doing, remember? I mean, They are so skanky, right? They're just like a bunch of skanky old skanks. And this is why it's like, come on, we can't be thinking that this is normal. What mother is okay with sending her child to a show like that?
Well, and they target, what's even worse is, that they use things like, we talked about rituals where they use menstruation blood, right? But now what are they doing in the school systems? They're telling little boys at age 4 or 5 that they have periods too. Now we know anatomically that boys do not have periods. They don't have menstruation cycles. It's specific to the female body. So what is it? What are they covering up? They're covering up these little boys are being sodomized. They're being trained to be sodomized regularly every month,
So
and
they can
in
have
that
periods.
they're collecting their menstrual blood. I'm serious about it. That's really the truth about it. And are we okay with that? I'm not okay with little boys being sodomized. I'm not okay with that. I don't think that that should be part of the curriculum for preschool or kindergarten age boys, you know, that are really being trained to be escorts in the system to provide entertainment, which what is the entertainment? It's sexual in nature. You know, that's exactly what's happening to our children. And that's what needs to stop. You know, why are boys having this gender confusion? It's because these are the lies they're being told starting from a young age. And come on, women, you know, we need to step up and not allow our boys in our community to go through things like that. Someone has to be their voice and somebody has to call out the truth.
You know, the more I see what's happening on, I don't have TikTok, thank God. I just can't. I can't. I just can't. But, you know, I have YouTube and I have Facebook. So I'll see stuff on there that comes off TikTok. There was this disturbing account with this young single mom and her Ren, and the baby's name is Ren, and I think the mother is Jacqueline. Ren, W-R-E-N. I mean, this child was like a toddler, maybe 3 or 4, but the mother had something like 17 million followers. Now, let me tell you, I'm sorry, after everything I've read, when your YouTube channel is 17 million followers strong, you belong to them. You belong to them. I've heard umpteen stories about how, like actors and things, they're getting influencers and they are now hauling in the influencers, getting them to do all sorts of disgusting things at disgusting parties. I've heard this at least 3 or 4 times now that they're doing the same thing to influencers. This girl, you can see, I mean, and she's getting her child to eat pickles suggestively, who's 3 or 4. The pedophiles salivating after that child. And the mother is not, the one guy says, well, something about happiness must be Ren's stepdaddy. I mean, something like that. And like just and she just carries on. But when you look at her talk, there's a blankness about her that only because I do these shows am I aware of what that actually is now. I know that that girl has been something been done with her head, that she is putting her child out there on a platform of TikTok of 17 million followers, and all the pedophiles are like salivating after her. I know she's turned off comments and stuff now, but that was going on for quite, I mean, I only caught the end of it, but I was horrified. And this happens over and over and over again. And these young women, young single mothers, desperate for money, never had money before, suddenly become influencers because they got pretty eyes and a nice bum and doing things, and now they have money and it's spent in all the wrong places. I don't know. That's just a story for another day, isn't it?
Well, yeah. Yeah, it's crazy, you know. Crazy.
Sure. Anyway, guys, take care of your kids, please, man. It's really, really not cool. Anyway, Jess, that was super, super interesting indeed. I'm not sure if there's anything else you have to say in closing before you end off for us in prayer.
Yeah, let's close in prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for the things that you are allowing to be revealed in our time. Lord, we ask that we may be found faithful stewards of the truth, that we may not give way, be compromised, nor shy away from intimidation, Lord. Let us stand courageously and with boldness and boldly proclaim your truth. Lord, we know that by your blood you purchased every single man, woman, and child to be a kingdom of priests, Lord. You have declared that we are a people that are set apart for you, that in that there's a holiness, there's a sacred calling that each of us has. Lord, there's a beauty in that, that you have created us and raised us up to be so much more than what the world is trying to make us. Lord, we ask that you would give us, again, that wisdom, that knowledge, that understanding in how to address these issues that are happening in our world and in our regions, Lord. Um, Let us not be afraid to step forward and to speak the truth where we can. Let us be those that fight for the children in our communities, that fight for the children in our schools. Um, Lord, even the children in our communities being trafficked through CPS and other organizations, let us not turn our faces away, but let us fight for them, that they may be free, that they may be safe, that they may grow up in safe communities, just having that opportunity to be children, Lord, innocent children, enjoying life, enjoying creation, enjoying the things that you made us to delight in, Lord, not delighting in others' perverseness or things that they're taught or trained to do. We ask that our children may just have life and that they may have it abundantly. We ask this in your powerful name, Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, beautiful Jessie.
Thank you.
And thank you, everybody, for joining us. Joanne, you're such a star-studded, lovely gal. Thank you so much for your super sticker, or whatever you call that thing. Is it called a super sticker or a star? Called sticker. Thank you, Joanne. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Jessie, thank you so, so much. Really, really, really good to know. Guys, this is the information we need to share far and wide, please. Just share. And I'm going to be doing some short clips on this one as well. So watch the channel, watch the reels and things. I'm going to be putting a few short clips on just to share. I think when we do that, it's going to be very amazing, because then at least people can see, and that might just, this is the type of stuff people, there's no more waiting. This is my point, I guess. That's what I'm saying. You know, we can't be sleeping and ignoring things anymore. Okay, guys, God bless you all. Take good care of yourselves. And as I said earlier on, thank you so much for doing life with us. Isn't it wonderful? Can you imagine doing this on our own, right? No. So thank you, everybody. Take good care of you, and I'll see you back with Bryce in about an hour, and I'll see you over the rest of the week as well. Be good now.